Today we're at the Vacuum Interrupters manufacturing facility in Denton, Texas, and we'd like to say thank you to them for being the host for our presentation today. They manufacture replacement vacuum interrupters. They have vacuum interrupter testing with what's called a MAC TS4, which actually measures the amount of vacuum in the vacuum interrupter, and they have the vacuum interrupter test set, which measures vacuum integrity, so that you can tell the quality of the vacuum within the vacuum interrupter. They have circuit breaker contact timer testers, and they also do SF6 interrupter repair, where they can recover the SF6 from your interrupter, refurbish it, and then give it back to you to put it back in service. And they also manufacture in this facility here in Denton custom replacement vacuum interrupters. They are made in America. For further information, you can look them up at vacuuminterrupters.com, or you can contact them at 214-442-5877. Now we're going to move into the presentation dealing with CBS ArcSafe at this time. The first slide that you're going to see before we actually go on camera is going to deal with NFPA 70E and where our equipment comes into helping you. CBS ArcSafe manufactures over 700 products to help people with remote racking and remote switching for arc flash mitigation. And the whole idea is to be outside of the arc flash hazard boundary when you're performing that operation. How do we do that? Well, our equipment works at the engineering controls level of the inverted pyramid you see on the right side of the slide. Instead of being down there at PPE and having to possibly be inside of the arc flash hazard boundary, we can get you anywhere from 30 feet to 100 meters away from the switchgear and keep you and your electricians or operators outside of the arc flash hazard boundary. On today's presentation, we're going to use 4 different remote switch actuators, and these are going to be on a Pringle switch, a General Electric HPC, and a Boltswitch, along with an SNC, I want to say it's a mini ruptor switch. Okay, now you can have switches that were made by Barkaloo/Square D that are Bolt-Loc switches. You can have stuff made by ITE or Federal Pacific. So just because we don't have everything here doesn't mean we don't have an idea of what it is you have or what it's going to take to make a product for you for a particular type of pressure contact switch in the event that you've got something like that. So you can look through our online product finder and other stuff to see that. The first actuator we're going to work with here is on a Pringle switch. Now, one of the things to discuss about a Pringle switch is there's a couple different generations. The first generation had a black handle with a red pistol grip button up at the top. Then you'd move the switch handle 90 degrees. The second generation had a cast aluminum handle with a different shape than this. So we understand the variances in the manufacture of what you may have, and so it's important for us to know geometrically and catalog number wise which type of switch we're dealing with, so we give you the proper actuator for it. This is the RSA 135, and it's for the QA CBC type 2500 amp and below switch. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it up here, and if you want to, you can look at the nameplate on it. And there's a second plate on here. I'm going to turn it on the side so you can see. And it's this little one right here, and what it shows is what the timer settings are, and we're going to discuss that in just a second. First, I'm going to work to mount this onto the switch. You can see we've got the handle and the shunt trip button, so we've got a locator that goes right here on the handle that'll help us position the RSA in the right place. we go. Now, on the label here it says it takes 1 stroke and timer set is 5 and 5. So we use the RSO 3D with this actuator. You can watch as I turn it on here. I'm going to go to just local right now and I can check my setup. And it says AR on. Okay. Now, just to explain real quick what AR is. We have several different actuators that require a different amount of functionality to make them be able to operate and manipulate the switch. AR is what's called automatic return, and this you can have it either for trip or close or for other different things. So there are several different settings in the AR library that are in the RSO 3D, and we tell you with each actuator whether or not it needs AR, and if it needs AR, how and what version of AR it requires for that operation. So before we can do anything, we'll tell it, okay, we want to check right now, we want it to go to the 3- line. We want to see how many cycles we have. That's 1. We're going to check T1, and we need to set that to 5. Oops, I got to get it right to 5. If you overrun it, it's not a hard problem to go back and set it back up. And T2 should be at 5 also. Okay, so I've got 1, 5, and 5 set. Now, with the RSO 3D, you've probably seen this before in our other presentations, but we have 2 pins. You've got a 3-pin and a 4-pin. We try and make this what we call idiot resistant, so you can't try and put a 4-pin connector on a 3-pin and have anything work, or a 3-pin on a 4-pin. These are Amphenol connectors. This one just cams on for the 3-pin. The 4-pin has a keyway that it lines up with. Now, for the purpose of the video, I'm just standing right here next to the switch. In reality, if I switch this over to remote now, I'm going to turn it on here, and it says on, and I'm going to actually step out of view or back up here so that we can do charge close. We only have to push it once, and it's going to cycle up and come down and close it. And then I hit trip once, and you hear it retract the actuator. And that's how this is set up to operate. So if you've got these, you can find these in chemical plants. You can find them in major buildings. Down there is the intake power system when it comes off the low side of the utility feed. So you'll find Pringle switches in many different industrial and commercial applications. You can find them in agricultural applications like rice mills and things like that. Now, for the next actuator, the General Electric HPC, we're going to have the RSA 73, and the RSA 73 comes in 2 sizes. The GE switches are basically 2,000, or I think it's 2,500 amps and above, and this is a 3,000 amp switch we're going to be dealing with today. And the difference is they're both labeled HPC or THPC. The lower amperage frame has just a single handle instead of a double handle. So this is what it looks like on this side. This is going to operate the handle, and this is going to operate our trip. The actuator is very easy to line up and set on the system because you've got the locating frame that's going to go around it. For this one, it takes 3 cycles. T1 is 4.6 and 4.8, and I think Ben has already adjusted the RSO 3D for us. So again, we can hook this up. Again, we've got a 3-pin and a 4-pin connector. The length of the cable is about 30 feet or to 35 feet when stretched out, roughly about 10 meters. The funny thing is you're looking at it right now, you go, gee whiz, there's a lot of tension in that cable. Well, when you stretch this thing out, it will go out that far. So there's no need to be right in front of the switchgear. And I know the common human tendency is that somebody's been doing this for 20 years and they want to be able to stand there and look and watch things happen. Well, the whole purpose is to be outside of the arc flash hazard boundary. So here we're going to hit our charge close on our radio remote. Let me see. Let me check to make sure this is set up right here.
You're probably on local.
That's it. It's on local versus remote. Let me get back onto remote. There we go. Okay. Here we go. That's one. It's going to take 3 cycles. So that's our first cycle. Here's our second. So now the switch is in the closed position, and if we want to trip it, we simply hold the button down and release it. We have actually had a couple locations that wanted to have, for HPC switches, these systems hardwired into the control room. So most of the time we make it so that these are removable and moved from one switch to the next. But on occasion we have had customers who say, hey, we want this to actually be built in there, help us to integrate it into our control. It's not a usual request, but I'm just letting you know that sometimes we have to work to meet the customer's needs, and we can work to help them with that. The next switch we're dealing with is a Boltswitch. Now, one of the things you're going to notice here is we've got a couple of mounting lugs here for reference points. And this helps us to position the RSA on here. The RSA has 2 components. The first component is the charging closing mechanism right here. And you'll notice the locators are right down here below the magnets. Okay. And our second component is the trip unit. Okay, this mounts separately once you've got this part put on, because it has to go underneath the collar for locating on the trip module. Let's see now.
You may talk about the different angles of travel with the bolt switches, twist shunt trip,
Yep.
shunt trip.
Okay. Yeah, the bolt switch actually comes in a variety of different operations. And so you've got, with whether it's a Pringle switch where you have a 90-degree travel up and down, or 115 degrees of travel for close. The bolt switch, it has its own unique characteristics, whether you've got the VL or the SB or the BL switches, and we work to know exactly which type it is that you've got, so we know the proper geometry that you're needing to work with. Let me get this hooked up right here. Drop in, there we go. So this one has 1 stroke and time of 6 and 0, and then that's just going to be, hold it. It's 2 separate actuators, okay? So we're set up, cycle 1, 6, okay, we're set up there. So for charge close now, we'll just push our charge close button once. You hear the switch close right there. And then for the trip, we'll hold it down. And the handle will actually release, and I can either just push it back down here the rest of the way after it's accomplished the trip. Or if I want to, I can use the trip actuator by itself and do that without this on there. Normally, some of the guidance that we were given a long time when we started is never let a customer close a breaker without being able to open it right away. So that's the reason we want to have both the close and the trip on it when you're going to go operate the switch gear. Now these are, the first 3 here are all low voltage switches. The last one is a medium voltage load break switch. Now they come with names like load interruption switch, load break switch, and there's a couple other names out there, but they're all performing the same thing. They're knife blade switches. This one is the S&C Versaruptor. Now, one of the things to understand also is S&C sells this switch to Allen Bradley and other switchgear manufacturers. And we know that. So if you say, well, gee whiz, I've got an Allen Bradley switch that looks exactly like that, it's because the switch was made by S&C, and then Rockwell Automation bought it and put it in an Allen Bradley cubicle. So these are the things just to understand. When you saw the introductory video, they were dealing with a GE PowerCon load break switch. So GE, Siemens, and other manufacturers will use that same switch, and they will put their nameplate on it. This is the RSA 116A. This is for the S&C, and the important things are when you set this up to basically have it parallel to the switch, and make sure you get your locator pin in the upper lockout tag out. And then it's pretty easy to mount onto the switch. This up here. There we go. That looks parallel right about there. Okay. Now, this one, unlike the last 3, is simply an open and close. So on this one, instead of the RSO3, we're going to use the RSO1. And you'll see that it's got trip, close, and these are the only features on it, and it has AR turned off.
Greg, just talk a little bit about the differences in RSO3 and the RSO1.
Okay. When we first started doing this over 11 years ago, somebody said, I need to operate a breaker control switch or a push button. That's an on-off function. And after we'd been making simple actuators for on-off functionality, about 3 or 4 months into the process, somebody says, I have to have something that will charge, close, and trip a breaker. And we're like going, gee whiz, well, we don't want to change anything that we've already done, and we don't want to sell somebody more functionality than what they need. So we had to develop the RSO3D to be able to charge, close, and trip breakers. This RSO1AR can operate over 350 different actuators for motor control centers, for simple breaker control switches, for push buttons, for knife blade switches. So if you've got an HVL switch or an HVLCC switch, it can operate those. That's a simple open and close function. That's what it's made for. When you have things with trip buttons like the prior 3 switches we dealt with today, where you've got to charge, close, and trip the breakers, then you need the RSO3D for those types of actuators. So with this now, we'll turn on our and we can see that we've got power on, and we've got 3 green here, so we've got 24 volts. Okay, so now I can step back closer to the camera. The switch is in the open position, so we're going to hold down the close button. Say again? Okay, so now we'll hold the close button down. And now to trip, we just hold the trip button down. This has, and understand that depending upon the remote switch actuator, we may have limit switches or other switches that are involved, so we allow or restrict the travel of the actuator so we're not exceeding the physical limits of the switch, because we don't want to break a switch. We want that switch to be able to function as it's normally supposed to operate. We pick the size of the motor that we use based on the forces we measure on the switches. One of the nice things that we have here at Group Circuit Breaker Sales is a big warehouse in Gainesville, Texas, along with where we were last time at Advanced Electric and Motor Controls in Irving. So we can pull resources from them and go measure the forces on several different switches to make sure what we're getting is a good representation of the forces required and the geometry required based on what we also have from you, our customer, for dimensions that you have to deal with for your particular switch and setup. So that's how we come up with how big a motor do we use, because you'll notice here, if we look at the one here on our Boltswitch, it's much bigger than the one here on our HPC switch. And there's a reason. This is a much stouter operating mechanism than what's right here in terms of the forces required to charge and close the breaker. If you've got questions, please ask. We'll wait for... okay, other stuff, just the basic coverage here. If you've got questions, you can forward them to info@cbsarcsafe.com, or you may contact us via phone at 1-877-472-3389. Once again, that's info@cbsarcsafe.com or 1-877-472-3389. Does anybody have any questions, Ben, or?
Not yet.
Okay. I'll just read a list of the various names that we've dealt with, and just so this may, if this piques anybody's interest. Barkaloo Electric, before 1967, made the Bolt-Loc switches. So they made the Bolt-Loc pressure contact switch and the Bolt-Loc load break pressure contact switch. Then Square D bought them up. So you could have one lineup that actually says Square D and one that says Barkaloo, and they look like the exact same switch, and they are. Boltswitch has the bolted pressure contact switch, the double throw before make Geneva tile switches. They've got mill switches, fused power circuit devices, tie switches, open type switches, and closed battery disconnect switches. Empire Electric switchboard and ITE both made a bolted pressure contact switch that are identical. GE made the high pressure contact switch, the HPC. Federal Pacific makes the bolted pressure contact switch load break, quick make, quick break switch. And the Kellett Company made the cam lock switch with pressure contacts. So if you have any of these, please give us a call, because this is what we work to address with this type of actuator. Fix it? Oh, and once again, we'd like to say thank you to our sister company, Vacuum Interrupters, Inc. They have offices in both Farmers Branch and here in Denton. This is their manufacturing facility for custom-made vacuum interrupters here. And those are made in America, and they'd be happy to talk with you if you have any of those. Again, the types of testing equipment they have are the MAC 4 for magnetron atmospheric conditioning testing for measuring the amount of vacuum. They have vacuum integrity testers, and they have circuit breaker timing contact testers. They do SF6 refurbishments, and you can check them out at info@vacuuminterruptersinc.com. If we're going to wait one more minute to see if there's any other questions. Once again, I'd like to